Welcome to Gunners R Us, a podcast where we are positively Arsenal, and that we are. I thought I'd just jump in and do a little bonus episode here. It's probably going to be quite short, but the Champions League draw was just done. So I thought I'd jump in and give us kind of instant reaction. We spoke about it in the WhatsApp with Joe and Simon. So I thought we'd kind of give all our thoughts via my mouth, really. That's a weird way of putting it. But we'll have an interesting show coming up Wednesday. Hopefully, it'll be Joe and Simon, myself. We'll be talking about what happened in that Brighton game this past weekend, which was, in my opinion, our best offensive performance of the year. And then we'll be talking about the upcoming horror show that could be Anfield away, even though what happened with Man United. And again, we'll talk about the Man United Liverpool game and how poor that was. And also maybe a little Christmas talk, and we'll get their direct opinions on this draw. And obviously everything that happened down in Luton, in Bournemouth, with Lockie going down. What we'll do now, though, is I'm going to read out the draw just because if you haven't heard it already, you'll be interested to hear it. So I'll start in reverse order. So we'll get to the English teams last. We've got Lazio versus Bayern. I think that will be a Bayern win over the two legs. I think Lazio have been decent, but they've kind of scrapped their way to a lot of wins. So I think looking at quarterfinals, I'm thinking Lazio through there. We've got Napoli-Barcelona, which I think is probably the tie of the round of 16, or is it round of 16? Round of 16. So I actually think Napoli are going to win that over two legs. I fancy Napoli to do quite well this year. Maybe a semi-finals, even a final potentially, but I actually think they might beat Barcelona. I do think it's the best one of the round of 16. Thing with Napoli as well is that Osimhen looks like he's just re-signed a new deal with Napoli, which was coming out right out of the blue because they've had a lot of issues recently, and they haven't been able to kind of tie him down. But it looks like they're going to tie him down. He got an incredible assist. If you want to look up an Osimhen assist from this past week, I wasn't sure who they're against, but it was an unreal assist. I think he scored 3 goals in the first 15 minutes of their game in Serie A. But wow, yeah, really good. And obviously that's kind of moved Arsenal away from the talk of signing Osimhen, and I think Chelsea are the same. I think both Arsenal and Chelsea are moving on to plan B, which is probably going to be Ivan Toney, who this week has said he prioritises a move to Arsenal in January and talk of a loan. I don't see that happening. I think Brentford will be too smart to kind of allow him to go mid-season, especially a season where they're not guaranteed safety, even though they probably are. But no, it'd be good to see Osimhen go through there. Bayern and Napoli with Osimhen and Kane going through. The next one is Inter versus Atletico. I don't think Inter are great. I think Atletico are their usual kind of defensive self. So I think over two, I think it'll be a low scoring two-legged tie, and I think Atletico will go through there. Which will have a German, Italian, and a Spanish team through so far. I think Dortmund versus PSV. Dortmund was so impressive in the group stages with PSG, Milan, and Newcastle. I think they could be a little dark horse, similar to Napoli, but I don't think they're quite as good as Napoli, but I think they could go a bit further. We played PSV over two legs. I don't think PSV were great. We drew away from home 1-0 with a very kind of minimalist side, and they went full strength to maybe 9 out of the 11. And they needed to win, even though it had to, a few things had to go wrong. But we got 1-1 there. Even though they're unbeaten in the Eredivisie, I think Dortmund should breeze through that one. That's a good tie for Dortmund. The next one is PSG, Real Sociedad. Real Sociedad are decent. Kieran Tierney's on loan over there. I think this could be a bit of an upset tie. I think you might see Sociedad come away with a narrow win. I would bet responsibly, bet on Sociedad to go through there, maybe £1.50, nothing crazy. So yeah, I think that's my shocker of the draw. I think Napoli and Sociedad, but I think Sociedad is a much bigger upset than Napoli going over Barcelona. Hiccup. And what we got next? We got Leipzig versus Madrid. Madrid, very similar to Man City in the sense that their biggest threat so far in the Champions League has been on counterattacks. Leipzig showed against Man City they were decent at counterattacks, and they scored a couple goals that way. I think that Madrid probably go through, but I think then Leipzig might cause more issues than they would expect. The next one is Copenhagen versus Man City. Of course, Man City drew FC Copenhagen. I think everyone makes that. I think everyone's going to make that joke because when you look at their line to the final last year, things like that, and just every year, every cup they're in, it always ends up, because as I talk about the Porto Arsenal game, if you were to put a kind of level on each team that we're going through that we could pick. So we could have 7 different teams that we could face. I think it was 7, maybe. It might have been 8 because there was no English side, was there? I think it was 7, but it might have been 8. But if you were to put a 1 through 8 system, 1 being PSG is the worst thing we could face. 8 was Copenhagen. I think everyone could see that. Obviously, they did beat Man United. And I think they were particularly good on that night. And I think Man United were particularly poor to kind of. But the thing is, they have got a atmosphere, and you see with Man City that all of a sudden they're showing some cracks. But I still think City will just comfortably go through that. I think Haaland's going to be. This is mid-February. We're talking February 13th and 14th will be the these ties being played. So we're a couple. 2 months, just under 7 weeks away. So, God knows where we're in the league, where Man City are in the league, where Haaland is fitness-wise, where anyone is fitness-wise. So we're not sure, but Copenhagen is probably the most favourable tie. Arsenal have got Porto. The away leg is first, which I prefer because you can get a big atmosphere if anything goes wrong in that first leg and try and get something going, as opposed to going in negatively, trying to defend a lead away from home or anything like that. If we were doing a scale, I would say Porto is about midway. So the teams we could have faced, PSG being the best and Copenhagen being the worst. I'd say I'd put Porto around the middle, which I like because I think I was saying on the podcast the other week, the one thing I didn't want is to face like a Copenhagen where it doesn't quite feel like Champions League, but then you kind of you do a hiccup, because the reason we're happy to be back in the Champions League is essentially to play the big teams and have those big Champions League nights in the Emirates. I think in Copenhagen, you could easily underestimate that and you don't get that atmosphere. And then you do go out with some mistakes. And with those mistakes, you don't then progress and you don't get the big Champions League nights. So I wanted something that was very Champions League-ish, but also very doable, as opposed to just, a really great night against PSG, but you go out. I want to get through to at least a quarter. So Porto, I think, is a really good tie. I'm happy with the tie. If you remember, Sami Nasri scored a really nice goal against Porto in the Champions League around the last time we were in Champions League. Well, 10 years ago. But I don't know, if you're going to the away games, it's a good place to go. Footballing wise, I think it matches up nicely. They will come out at us, which again, like Brighton did this past weekend, some other Champions League teams have. So at the Emirates, I do think we could win quite comfortably. But away from home, I'm just not sure. But again, like I said, we don't know where we're at. We don't know what we'll be doing in middle of February. Simon and Joe are both kind of happy with the draw. We both laughed, obviously, about Copenhagen and City, but they'll give their opinions fully on Wednesday's episode of Gunners R Us podcast. They'll also talk about Arsenal Brighton, and we'll talk about the incoming huge Anfield game, which could end in us being top at Christmas, them being top at Christmas, or a draw and Villa end up at top at Christmas. Are Villa the new Leicester? We'll talk about that on Wednesday. But for now, I'm going to sign off there and subscribe to the podcast, give it a 5-star review, and I'll see you Wednesday. Bye-bye.